There are two ways to teach sight words. I'm going to tell you what they are, and then I want you to pick which one you think is best. I'm April McMurtrey, a reading specialist, dyslexia specialist, the developer of the Learn Reading program, and I've been teaching struggling readers for over 30 years. Here's what's going on with sight words. First, we have to identify what sight words are. I'm not talking about high-frequency words that can be decoded. Those are not true sight words. Those are simply decodable words that occur frequently. So when I talk about sight words, I'm talking about words that break typical phonetic patterns at the time that an emerging reader would encounter those rules. So I'm going to tell you the two ways, and I want you to pick which one you think is best. The first way to teach sight words is to teach them as a whole unit, not as some of its parts. So in this method, they are learning that a sight word is a whole unit and should be memorized as a unit and not as some of its parts. There is one thing to memorize, the word as a whole. They can attach meaning to it, which helps a lot. This can be done with pictures or drawing or sketch that will attach meaning to what that word is, so it's easier to memorize. These words are learned by positive, repeated exposure with lots of games and activities, and by connecting meaning to it. Sight words with attached meaning. So teaching sight words as a whole unit is one way to teach them. Here is the other way to teach them. The other way to teach sight words is that some of its parts can be decoded, but there is a tricky letter or letters somewhere in there that breaks the phonetic rules, and so that is the only part of the word that they would have to remember a different sound for. This teaches a child that they can decode any word. Okay, here's what happens when that method is used. First, the child would have to know, is this a word with a tricky letter in it or not? Second, they have to remember which letter or letters in that word, if they were able to identify that that was a word with a tricky letter, what was the tricky letter? If I can decode any and every word except a few, and within those few words there are a few letters that can't be decoded, what were the letters in this? Is this one of those words? And if so, what was the letter that made the tricky sound? Third, if they were able to remember that that was a word with a tricky letter in it, and if they were able to remember which letter or letters made the different sound, then they also have to remember, what sound did that letter make? That is 3 things that they would have to remember for a sight word. Is it a sight word? What was the letter that didn't make the right sound? And what was the sound that that letter was supposed to make? So regardless of which way you teach them, they're going to have to remember something. They're either going to have to remember that the word as a whole unit is a sight word, and with some sort of attached meaning, they can figure out what that sight word is, or they are taught that they can decode every word, that no word needs to be memorized, except some words might have tricky letters in them that actually can't be decoded. And then they would have to remember what words those are, what the letters are that they're not supposed to sound out, and then the most important part, what was the sound that that letter was supposed to make, without attaching any sort of meaning to it to make it easier for them to memorize. This 3 things they have to memorize. This 1 thing they have to memorize. I've been trying to stay calm and kind and impartial, but you can probably guess which one I prefer. But I want you to decide. But here's the most important thing I want you to remember. Even though there are what some might call sight word wars, can we all just remember that we are all teaching children to read? And that's applaudable. Whether you teach sight words as a unit or as decodable parts, you're teaching a child how to read, and you're doing a good job. There are ways that we can all improve. The reading and research is changing all of the time. I stay abreast on the most current research. I have a big book right here below me, I'll show you, with all of the latest research in it, and this is what it says about sight words. These words do not follow a pattern and cannot be sounded out. Consequently, they must be committed to memory and recognized on sight. There's also a lot of different research out there. You can find a research study for whatever you are backing up. I go on evidence-based research backed by double-blind, peer-reviewed research studies. But that's hopefully not another debate for another time. Let's not debate. Let's talk about what works. For me, rule number 1 is we are teaching the student, not the lesson. Rule number 2 is they need systematic, synthetic phonics combined with fluency, vocabulary, comprehension, phonemic awareness, and even prior to that, phonological awareness. I could talk about reading for days. This video has gone on too long already. Follow for more if you'd like to talk about all things reading. And in the meantime, no matter what camp you're in, thank you for teaching.